Oof, that is absolutely massive. In a final, in a big money event, that's going to be the best way of fishing, because I feel like if you're going to catch an amount of fish, that's how you're going to do it. Probably the most popular and the best way of starting any match on a commercial fishery when you're fishing for carp. So why wouldn't you do the same when you're fishing on the bottom? It's exactly the same principle. Morning guys, you're joining me here today at the fabulous Hayfield Lakes. Now I've actually travelled up this morning for a 2-day practice session ahead of a couple of real decent matches I've got coming up here. To start off with, I've got the On the Flyer TV 2-day festival. Followed on, I've actually been lucky enough to qualify for the Maven Match this final here also at Hayfield. So I've come for 2 days practice, which is really important for me. I spent a big part of my career fishing for England, travelling across the world, fishing European and World Championships. And the process you go through when you fish those matches is you actually turn up at a venue and you fish for a week to 2 weeks practice before a 2-day event, which might seem a bit extreme to you. But the one thing I've learned from doing that process is just how important practice is. When you practice for a week to 2 weeks ahead of a match, by the time the match comes around, you're just faultless. You don't tend to make mistakes. You've had plenty of time to check your gear, make sure you're using the right equipment, you know how the fish are behaving, and you know what bait they're eating. So today, like I said, I've come up for 2 days, so I really want to have a good go and a good practice. I feel like today the fishing's going to be escalated a little bit. There's only 3 of us on the lake. We haven't got keep nets in. Obviously in a match situation, the fishing's going to be condensed, but the 3 things that I really want to cover in the next 2 days, the first one and the most important one for me is the kit you're using. You don't want to come to an important match or a match that you really want to do well in and use kit that's not up to the job. You don't want to be hooking fish and thinking to yourself, there's a good chance that could snap me, or the fish is running around and you're not using the correct elastic to stay in control of the fish. So the number one thing for me is to get all my kit right. Number 2 is to learn how the fish are behaving. Where are they at what point in the day? Are they short at the start? Then do they move long and then come back in? Or are they long and come back in? That's just another thing that you've got to look at. And then lastly, what bait the fish are eating. Here at Hayfield is renowned for being a pellet venue because of the depth. So hard pellets is what I'm going to fish mainly today. When you feed other baits here, it tends to draw other fish into your peg and you might not be able to catch the carp properly. But that's the 3 things that I really want to cover today. And if I can get that right over the next 2 days going into my 2 important matches, I'll be really happy. It'd still be very easy to come here today and practice and not really get anything out of it. So I'm going to do those 3 things. I'm going to take you through the methods that I'm going to use today. Hopefully if I can get all those 3 things right, and if you've got any matches coming up soon that you want to have a practice for and you want to learn how to practice properly, hopefully I can show you today and catch you a few more fish. For me, probably the most popular and the best way of starting any match on a commercial fishery when you're fishing for carp is probably starting short with hard pellets. I think the noise that you make when you either throw or cup in hard pellets really does have an initial response and gets fish into your peg very quickly. And for some reason, at the start of a match, when everybody tends to sit down, puts their keep nets in and gets ready to start the match, a certain percentage of fish will move close to you. So starting your match short can be absolutely brilliant, especially if you're on a lot of fish. If you're on a lot of fish and you start short and the bottom's nice and it's hard there, you can go in and you can have an absolutely brilliant run. If you can drop in and catch 6 or 7 decent fish short, then it does really put you in good stead for the rest of the match. The fish that you catch short do tend to be very big as well, so it really does bump your weight up. And the other great thing about fishing short is that most of the time when you fish short, the bottom's rock hard. You won't be on the silt yet, which makes the fish very, very easy to catch compared to fishing on silt. So what we're going to do today, we're going to start short, like I just mentioned. We're going to start using a kinder pot, and then once we've caught a couple, hopefully, we'll then tend to move on to throwing the bait. What starting with a kinder pot does is just sets a little trap. So you pot it in, you set a little trap over a small area, you put your hook bait right in the middle of it, and you can get a very, very quick bite. So I'm just going to flick my hook bait past the end of my pole, letting it all settle in, and then I'm just going to drop my pellets in. I'm going to drop them in from about 18 inches above the water, and that creates a nice amount of noise. If I'm not getting any fish in my peg, you can drop your pellets in from a bigger height and make more noise. Or if I'm getting fish in my peg and I'm foul hooking or I'm missing bites, you can create less noise by dropping them closer to the water. And you can even sneak them in just by literally tapping them in about an inch above the water. Now that is an absolutely brilliant way of starting your match, and I've caught so many fish over the years starting like this. But what does tend to happen when you're fishing with a kinder pot, you go in, you'll catch one or two, and then you can start to miss bites, or maybe you can start foul looking an odd fish. What I'll tend to do then, as an initial reaction straight away, what I tend to do then is take my kinder pot off, and then I'll start throwing my bait, which I'll touch on a little bit more in a minute. Fingers crossed we can get a bite quite quickly, but this really is a brilliant way of starting your match. Here at Hayfield, when you fish at this distance where I'm looking for about 6 to 7 foot of water, the bottom will still be sloping away. So it's really important that you fish with quite a short line from your float to your pole tip, because the last thing I want is the wind just to take the float or get, there we go, an initial response straight away. The wind to take the float, or you get a liner and then you move the float past your pole tip, and then all of a sudden you'll be fishing off the bottom. So quite a short line from my float to my pole tip really is important. That's just a little stocky, but it just shows you how quickly you can catch. Another day that could have been 8 or 10 pounds. But touching on the rig again, that short line is really important when you're fishing on this short line. And the other great thing about it not only holds your float in place, it also allows you to hit more bites. With a short line, you definitely hit more bites. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to repeat that process. This medium matrix pot takes about 25 to 36 mil pellets. Now that's a perfect amount for me. And what I'll do when I start throwing, I'll repeat that amount of bait. So what I'll do when I start throwing, I'll throw 12 to 15 pellets twice. And then you're keeping the same amount of bait in your peg, but you're introducing them in 2 different ways. So we're just going to repeat that process again. About 18 inches off the water, I'm just going to tap them in and create a bit of noise. And then just let that rig straighten out so it's all dead vertical from your bait to your pole tip, and then just lower your float in nice and slow. And then you know 100% your bait's on the bottom on that slope and you're fishing directly over my bait. Oh, that was a little indication. We've just nicked one there. But it just shows you how well that works, that little bit of noise that really does bring the fish in. So even though I've just bumped that one, what I'll do, I'll still repeat the process again. So my hook bait's on. I'm actually fishing an 8 mil on the hook today and feeding 6s, so it just stands out a touch. I'm just going to repeat that process again and see if I can get one more. But this really is a brilliant way of starting your match. So about 18 inches off the water, we're just going to tap those pellets in, and then we're just going to lower that float directly straight into those pellets. Make sure everything's nice and vertical, you're straight on that slope, the bottom's nice and hard so you shouldn't miss too many bites. If you see your float start to do that where it just drops down a touch, just lift your float up again, because that might mean your hook bait pellet's just past where you've plumbed up and it's just dragging your float down a touch. So that just proves the point of how accurate you've got to fish when you fish on these slopes. But fishing on a slope can be absolutely brilliant as well, because that means that there's not going to be anywhere near as much silt on the bottom. So this is going to be my third feed now. First one we hooked a little stocky, second one we bumped a fish. I reckon that might have been another stocky again. See if I can get 1 or 2 more, and if it doesn't improve and I don't start catching big fish, what I'll do, I'll start feeding by hand, and then hopefully that'll bring even more fish back into my peg. So there you go. I think that's just another small fish, but it just shows you how quickly feeding hard pellets short on the bottom can bring fish into your peg. Another stocky carp. So what we'll do now, obviously using that kinder pot and making that much noise has brought some smaller fish into my peg, which is great. I've started my match and I'm getting bites. I've got a couple of fish in my peg, in my keep net, which is really important. Now what we'll do, which is a perfect timing to show you the difference between feeding. So what we'll do now, we'll take that kinder pot off. We'll go out. And when I feed by hand, what I try and do is get my float about a foot off the water, exactly like what I was doing with my kinder pot in. I'll try my best to feed as accurate as possible. It's quite difficult at this distance. That was perfect. And we're going to feed twice. Now, what I tend to think happens when you feed twice and why it works so well is that you can imagine if I'm sat here on my seat box today and I'm looking this way, if I hear a noise behind me, I can look behind me, but I wouldn't necessarily know where the noise has come from. If I heard that noise again, when I turn round, I'll know exactly where it is. I think that is the exact same principle when you're fishing for carp. You throw once, they hear the noise, so they turn to it, and then when you throw a second time, they move to it. And I think that's why feeding twice works so well. And it's the same for F1s as well. When you fish for F1s, when you loose feeding shallow, it's always best to go dunk, dunk and feed twice. It works so, so well. So we fed twice when my float dropped in. We had a little indication, I struck at that. And then no more indications. So what I'll do, I'll leave it about a minute because I still feel like there's quite a few, there's an odd fish there. There might be little stockies, there might be an odd big carp there. But we'll give it about a minute to 90 seconds and then we'll give it another feed. What you've got to remember is when you're fishing in this depth of water is, I know it feels like you're feeding all the time and you might feel like you're feeding too much, but I can promise you on these big lakes where there's lots of fish in the lake, like i.e. skimmers, little stocky carp, big carp, all that bait is 100% getting eaten. So we had an initial reaction, so I'm just going to feed again, twice by hand. And then we're good, we're set, ready to get a bite now. Well, there we go. We fed by hand, and straight away I got a few less indications, but then we've hooked a big fish, or a better fish, rather than those stockies. I wouldn't say it's as big as what they can be here at Hayfield, but it's still a real decent fish. And what you've got to remember now, when we're feeding by hand, if you want to, when you're playing a fish, you can also feed by hand to keep the fish in your peg. But I'm not going to start off with. I'm just going to make sure I get this one in. It's a slightly better one. Make sure you get it in, and then I'm just going to repeat the process. And when the fishing gets really good, that's maybe at the point then where you can hook it and then maybe feed as well. That can be really good as well. So 8mm on the hook. One great little tip for you as well, I've got, never ever keep the same 8mm on the hook. If it starts to go a little bit fluffy, then change it. So we're going to go out at the same point again, feed by hand twice, and we'll see if we can get one more, hopefully a big one. And then that really does show you how good starting short can be. There's a load of different ways you can start your matches here at Hayfield, but starting short, I'm just going to feed a third time that time because that second throw just went a little bit too far. Just going to get it a little bit more accurate. That was perfect. The one other great thing about starting short as well is that you don't have to feed anywhere else in your peg. So if you don't want to feed a Waggler line and you don't want to feed your long pole line quite yet, not at the start of the match, starting short, you're just feeding short, you're leaving everything and resting the rest of your peg. You're not putting any pressure on anywhere else in your peg, which can be absolutely brilliant, because if you can catch here for like an hour or even 40 minutes, it just gives the rest of your peg time before you go out, so it's nice and rested and there's no pressure on your peg. Now this is the one thing, this is straight away, this is covering 3 of the things I wanted to cover when I practice. I'm seeing if my gear is strong enough. I've started on hard pellets. I'm starting short and I've got some bites straight away. So now I know that there is some fish short. Now the process might be to move out long and then come back later. So I'm covering all the things that I wanted to cover on my practice session. Well, there you go, another bite. I think it's another stocky, but it does show you just how many fish it draws into your peg. This might be an area where there's a lot of stockies here, and there might be other areas of the lake, i.e. 35, 39, where the fish that you're catching might be a touch bigger, but it does tend to be quite a few stockies here. But now I've caught another one for you. So that was 2 kinder potting and 2 throwing. I'm actually going to talk you through the rig I'm using. Right, so I'll start at the bottom of the rig. To start off with, I'm using a medium latex band. Now the great thing is about these bands, you can use them for any size of pellet and you can also use them for casters. Isn't going to be necessary today, but the days of having pins of caster bands, pellet bands are all over. If you just use those medium latex bands, you can use them for absolutely everything. 8 mils, 6 mils, 4 mils, all casters. Hook, size 16 MXC4 hook, lovely and strong, and it's the perfect size for an 8 mil skretting pellet. If you're using an 8 mil copping pellet, you might want to think about using a 14, but for an 8 mil skretting, then a 16 is absolutely perfect. The hook length itself is 0.18 power micron, but I set my hook lengths and my rigs up a little bit different to most people. Most people tend to use 4, 5, 6 inch hook lengths, but when I'm fishing myself now recently, the last couple of months, I've been using 12 inch hook lengths, and I've been putting a number 9 cube onto the hook length. Now for me, when you use longer hook lengths, you just catch more fish. I've been doing quite a bit of tank testing at home, and when you've got knots in your line, i.e. loops, close to your hook, your rig just doesn't sink as nice. For some reason, with a long hook length and knots further away from your hook, when the bait sinks, it just sinks so much more natural. When you're fishing a pellet waggler, you're fishing long hook lengths. When you're dobbing, you're fishing long hook lengths. So why wouldn't you do the same when you're fishing on the bottom? It's exactly the same principle. So what I do, I put a number 9 cube just on my hook length. And what that does allow me to do as well, I can move that cube about. So if I'm missing bites, I might want to just dink it down. If I'm getting bites on the drop, I might just want to slide it up. Now, the reason I use 12 inch as well, because you can use longer, but I want my bulk shot quite close to my hook. So if I tie 2 very small loops and then just have my bulk at the top of those 2 loops, that's the perfect measurements for me. I've got a bulk then about 14 inches from my hook, and then I've got my dropper on the hook length so I can do whatever I want with that. So that's the way I've been setting my rigs up. It's a great little tip. I've been catching loads of fish since I've started doing that. The main line itself is 0.23 power micron, which might seem a little bit heavy to a lot of you, but I am fishing a match here now for 50 grand. So the last thing I ever want is to go and start fishing, having a rig working perfect, and then all of a sudden snap the main line because it's not quite strong enough. 0.23 to 0.18 really does give you the best chance of any fish you hook at getting it out. The float I'm using is a 0.75 power slim. Now I absolutely love this float for when you're fishing with big baits on the hook, i.e. 8 mil pellet, 8 mil meat, double corn, stuff like that. It's got a fiberglass stem, so it's really, really stable. A slim body, so if you're hitting if you're missing bites or you're hitting lots of different bites, then you're not creating too much resistance when you're striking. And it's got a 2.5mm hollow bristle, which is really important. Not only is it very easy to see, it's nice and stable, nice and visual, so when you're fishing with big baits, it's not going to start dragging under. I touched on it earlier, a quite short line between my float and my pole tip. When you're fishing on slopes, you need a short line because you don't want your float going in underneath your pole tip or away from your pole tip. You want it to be right where you've plumbed up. Dacron connector, really, really important when you're fishing like this for me. A super short one, because if you get the wind in your face, sometimes if you just use a bead, the line can wrap around the end of your pole and you'll strike, hook a big fish and it will snap you. So you're just using a super short connector is really important. And then last but not least, the green slick. I believe it's the 16 to 18. That's the perfect size for all this type of fishing. You can see me there, and I've caught some stocky carp, which are quite small, but that's fine for this. But if I do go in and tend to hook one 12-pound, then it's not a problem. There's plenty of power in that elastic that I'd be able to get it out. And last but not least, the top kit itself. Power top kit, but it's a long top kit, which is really important. I don't want to start using short top kits on venues like this where you can hook fish within 12 or 15 pound and then run out of elastic and end up getting snapped up. That rig, it's all nice and balanced, 018, 023, that elastic, long top kit, that really does put you in good stead of hooking loads of fish and getting everything out. And using the correct float, the correct hook and everything. It's just really nicely balanced and it's just going to catch you a lot of fish. I started potting and we had a good response. I caught a couple of stocky carp, moved to throw in, I caught a bigger one and I've caught some stocky carp, but I've had bites there straight away. So it just shows that during the early part of your match, there is going to be some fish short. And if you can go in and catch those better stamp of fish, it's a brilliant way of fishing. I carried on fishing there for a bit and slowly it did dry up. My next move now would be to go onto the long pole, which is I'm going to be looking for about 10 to 11 foot. So I've already plumbed up and it's about 13 meters here, which is perfect. We have got a little bit of a side wind, so holding 13 meters isn't too much of a problem. We're going to be fishing very, very similar. I'm not going to start off with a kinder pot, I'm just going to fish with a catapult, but I'm still going to be fishing with an 8mm on the hook and I'm still going to be feeding 6mm. So the process is very similar to fishing short. We're going to go out and I'm still fishing on a slope there. Believe it or not, 13 meters here at Hayfield is still slopes away. So we're just going to flick that hook bait past where I'm fishing. I'm going to hold my float about 18 inches out of the water and I'm going to feed twice, exactly like I was doing short, but obviously I'm going to feed via the catapult. There we go, it's perfect. And we're just going to lower that float in straight away, straight on top of those pellets, which is exactly what we were doing short. Obviously, when I'm fishing long, I'm still on that slope, so it's really important to keep your float in place. But we are fishing 13 meters, so fishing with a 6-inch line long with a touch of a side wind is very difficult. So I've just increased that length of line to 12 inches, but it's still not long enough that my float's going to go past my pole tip or come inside of my pole tip, varying the depth I'm fishing at. Obviously out there we're fishing in deeper water, so there is a very good chance that you could get some liners and false indications. What the job you've got to do is trying to get your feed in and get into a process where you're hooking every fish in the mouth, you're hitting bites, and you're feeding at the right times as well. So I just fed then as soon as I drop my rig in. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to wait about a minute to 90 seconds. If I haven't had indication, I'll feed again. What I'm going to do, I didn't get an indication off that feed, so I'm just going to lift that float out of the water, let all my rig straighten out so it's nice and vertical. I'm going to feed once, I'm going to feed twice, and I'm going to get nice and patient and wait for a bite now. So See, that was an indication straight away after I fed. So what I'll do, I'll wait about another minute to 90 seconds. If I don't get an indication, I'll feed again. It's quite aggressive fishing, but the depth that you're fishing in and the distance that you're fishing at, it does allow you to be able to feed quite a bit of bait. There's going to be more silt on this line at 13 meters than there is at like your 6 meter line, but it's still not very, very silty. So we had an indication straight away after that last feed. That float's sitting there absolutely lovely considering the weather. It's just sitting off the end of my pole tip. I'm just going to give that another feed now. Oh no, there's an indication and then we're in. See, look, I was just about to feed then and I've hooked one. That just shows you sometimes you just got to be a little bit more patient. But that's a really good sign. I've gone out, I've fed twice, 2 times twice, and then we've hooked a fish. Now, what I do see a lot of when I come to hayfield is I see a lot of people struggling to play carp when you're fishing in 10 to 11 foot of water. It is quite difficult because you obviously got to fish with your long 3 on, and you've got to net the fish with your long 3 on because your rig's so long. I am using the 16 to 18 slick, so it does keep the fish under nice and control. But what I find when you're playing these fish in 10 to 11 foot of water is if you get back to your number 3, hold it about halfway down, keep everything nice and low, get your landing net ready in your hand, and they should, if they play ball, it's very difficult to do, but if they play ball, if you keep it all nice and low, don't lift your top kit up too high out of the water, they should come fairly close to you. You might have to strip a little bit more elastic in, keep everything nice and low, and then they pop up quite close to you, just like that. And if you net them like that, then realistically it's not taking you any longer to get them in and as if you're fishing with a shorter rig when you fish short. So I got that in, that's a brilliant sign. I can look back up and I can see some fizzing still in my peg. So it shows there's some fish still in my peg, which is another brilliant sign. So get this one unhooked nice and quickly. And we'll go out and we'll see if we can get another one. But straight away, that's a decent fish. That's the sort of stamp fish you're looking for to win the match. When you win the match here at hayfield, you tend to catch those like 6 to 7 pound fish. If you're hooking those stockies, sometimes you might not be fishing the right bait, or you might not be fishing the right area of your peg. So we're going to go back out and we're just going to repeat that process as best as possible. But when you get in the rhythm of fishing this long line, fishing in that depth, and you're playing your fish correctly, you're using the right elastic and you're getting back to your long 3, it can be an absolutely devastating method. I've seen so many matches won on this. So I'm just going to flick past my pole tip. And the most difficult part about this is getting your feed accurate. We've got quite a strong side wind today, so it's very difficult. But that's perfect, that one there. See if we can get another one going in right. Perfect. And then hopefully that, with those 2 feeds, oh, little indication on the drop there. Just going to lower that straight in the middle of that feed and we're good to get a bite now. And there we go. So those 2 feeds I've done when I initially went out were absolutely perfect. I felt like that was the right amount of bait and they went in with the perfect accuracy. And I sat there for about 40 seconds and had a real clean bite. Now that's so important. If I can repeat that process every time I go out, that's when you get into a rhythm where you're going to win the match. So I'm going to try and do it again. Hopefully it all goes to plan. So I'm going to hold my number 3 halfway down. I'm going to keep everything as low as possible and I'm going to try and get the fish coming up quite close to you. There we go, it's just a Crassio, so it's fairly simple that time. But using the correct landing net handle is also really important. I find when you're fishing like this in this depth of water, if you use a 3 meter handle, it's too short. So I've got a 3.5 meter handle, which is absolutely perfect for this type of fishing. But another really nice fish, weight builder, Crassio. Now for me, what's happened so far, we've started short, we've caught some smaller fish, which is brilliant, we've had a great start. Then we've moved out onto our long pole line and we've had indications straight away. So that shows me the first move I've made once one line's died was the correct move, which is exactly what I was talking about in the intro, about trying to learn how the fish are behaving on the day. So I feel like now, if I was to come and fish here a match tomorrow, starting short and then my next move being the long pole is correct. Both lines I've been on, I've fed pellets and I've got fish into my peg straight away. I haven't foul looked anything, so that straight away is telling me I'm feeding the right bait, which is another thing that I want to tick off the list. And then lastly, the kit I'm using, I haven't lost any fish yet. So far, I'm not saying this is going to last all day, but so far the moves we've made for this practice session has been perfect. So if I was to come and fish a match tomorrow, I would emulate what I've done so far. But yeah, that's the long pole. I've plumbed up in 10, 11 foot. Now I've caught you a couple of fish, what I'll do, I'll take you through my rig again. So rig-wise on the long pole, very, very similar to the short pole in what actual kit I'm using. So medium latex band, size 16 MXC4 hook, 018 hook length again, 12 inches, exactly the same as on my short rig. A number 9 cube on the hook length. The only real difference is because I'm using a bigger float, I'm actually using an Olivet. So I've got a small 1 gram Olivet at the top of the hook lengths with 9 number 9s just below the Olivet, 1 number 9 cube just above it. Now that's a really nice little simple bolt for when I'm using a 1.5 gram float. Number 9 dropper as well. 023 power micron, everything identical to my short pole line. But the biggest difference is the float I'm using. Obviously, you've got to try and balance the weight of the float to the depth that you're fishing. So on that short line, I'm fishing 6-7 foot, so a 0.75 is absolutely perfect. For the long pole line, we're fishing in 10-11 foot, so we need a bigger float. Now, I've tried various different floats in that depth because when you're fishing in that depth, you would think that you will catch lots on the drop because there's lots of water to fall through, but that just doesn't seem the case for me. When you catch really well on that long pole, your bait's on the bottom, your float's dead still, you fed accurately around your float and you get a real clean bite. So for me, getting your hook bait to the bottom as quick as possible is absolutely apparent. So I've gone for a 1.5 gram float. It's got a 2 mil bristle, which is really important because the light's quite difficult here at Hayfield, so you need to be able to see it, and you're also fishing with an 8 mil on the hook, so you need quite a thick bristle. It's got a 0.8 carbon stem, which is also really important because it makes it nice and stable, and a slim body. Even though it's a 1.5 gram float, most people would think, oh, when you go to a 1.5 gram you need a round body float. You just don't. You carry on using exactly a similar float, but it's just obviously a bigger size. When we're fishing on this long pole line, we're fishing on a slope, so I still want a fairly short line, but the wind's quite awkward today, so I've changed from a 6-inch line to a 12-inch line. I can still keep my float nicely in place, right on line with my pole tip, but it's not too long that it's going to drift in and out. It's not too short that I'm going to jerk the float in the wind. Exactly the same again, slick, 16 to 18 through a long top kit, so if I do hook some really big fish long, then I'm definitely going to get them out. But exactly the same as short, a really balanced jawball rig that any fish you hook you're just going to get out. The long pole on the bottom has been absolutely brilliant. I really feel like that's going to be a match winning method. So we've gone out, we've fed 6 mils via the catapult, feeding twice, fishing in that depth, and it's just been absolutely brilliant. Basically, every single time I've gone out, I've hooked a fish. We've caught some crassios, we've caught some stockies, but we've also had the stamp of fish I'm looking for to really win the match. That's 6 to 8 pound fish, and we've hooked loads. They're still fizzing there now, and I'm sure if I was just to keep on fishing in that depth, feeding in that manner, we're just going to keep catching all day. But there is another method that I need to cover on my practice sessions where if the weather's slightly different, i.e. not low pressure, not a slight breeze, is shallow fishing. If it was hotter, if the sun was out all day and there's less breeze, fishing shallow can be absolutely brilliant. It can be an absolute game changer. So fishing shallow is there's quite a few different ways of fishing shallow. For me, you either got mugging, flicking to fish that you can see. you've got slapping in your bait, or you've got another way of fishing shallow, which is called plopping, where you're feeding at the end of your pole, but you're not actually slapping in your bait, you're just swinging your rig past where you're actually feeding. So you've got mugging, slapping, or plopping. Now, for me, I don't want hundreds of shallow rigs set up. I just want a rig where I can dob, plop, or slap with and just have one rig set up, which is how I've set my shallow rig up today. The most important thing about that rig is the length of line between your float and your pole tip. Now, what I've done, I've just put the float near my nose, and where the end of my hand is, that's where I've tied my line off. Now, for me, that's a perfect length of line to do all three types of shallow fishing. But what I'm going to do to start off with, I'm going to start off slapping in my bait and see if I can catch some fish. What I'm going to do, I'm going to fish at the same distance as what I was fishing on the bottom, which allows you to drop back down onto the bottom at any point you want. If you were to start feeding longer, which is better for shallow, you then split your fish on where you're fishing on the bottom. So I'm still going to fish at the length that I'm fishing on the bottom, which is really important. Now, for me, when I slap my rig over with an 8mm on the hook, slapping it over 3 or 4 times is the perfect amount. So I'm just going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm just going to keep my float right in the middle of that noise that hook bait mate. And there you go, I can add a bite immediately after slapping. So 1, 3, 4, and then keep that float right in the middle of that noise. Now, that's an absolute brilliant way of fishing, and what tends to happen when you fish like that is you tend to catch real big fish. There you go, I had a bite straight away. That shows you, I haven't even fed that point, so that just shows you how many fish that brings into your peg, slapping that rig over. So that's one way of fishing shallow. Now, probably for me, in a final, in a big money event, that's going to be the best way of fishing, because I feel like if you're going to catch an amount of fish, that's how you're going to do it. You're going to slap your rig over, you're going to fish in your bait, and you're going to catch a weight. Mugging and plopping is brilliant when your fish aren't really feeding properly, and you're just looking to catch an odd fish like in the middle part of the match. So that's why I've started slapping. But if it's hot and muggy and the fish don't really want to feed, plopping and mugging can be absolutely brilliant as well. But all three ways of fishing, you will tend to catch some real big fish. You might catch crassios and stuff like that, but you do tend to catch real big fish. So I'm just going to repeat that process again. I'm going to go out, I'm going to slap that rig over 4 times, and I'm going to keep a bit of bait going in. That will keep the fish that are on the bottom happy. There you go. Oh, bite straight away then. Just slap it over 3 times now, bite straight away. There you go. That just shows you how many fish that brings into your peg, slapping your rig over. I'm actually going to feed a bit of bait now. I've hooked one. Feed twice, the same as when I was fishing on the bottom. I'm going to get that. And that will bring some fish back into your peg after you've hooked one, which will scare a lot of fish out of your peg. But the thing I really do like about this rig and that length of line is that I can be slapping, I can be plopping, I can be mugging, and all 3 of them I can do with one rig. I don't have to set millions of different rigs up. So I've just caught 2 fish slapping. What I'll do, I'll try and get one for you now plopping. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to change my pellet again because it's just gone a little bit fluffy. It's going to be quite difficult to do this because we've got a bit of a wind that's coming in my face and sideways, but I'll try and do it for you anyway. So I'm going to feed my bait right at the end of my pole tip, and then I'm just going to swing this rig past. So I'm just going to swing that rig out past like that, see that? And I'm going to feed some bait at the end of my pole tip. So just always try and fish in exactly the same position as you were fishing when you were fishing on the bottom. So I'm going to feed twice, the same as what I was doing when I was on the bottom. Just going to lift that rig up and just plop it past. And that can also be a great way of fishing. Ooh, that was a little indication there. I think the weather is going to make fishing like that today very difficult, but we've got to give it a quick go as it's a practice session. It's just another box ticked off. And obviously slapping's been very good. We went out, we slapped the rig over 3 or 4 times, and we've caught 2 straight away. So I'm going to keep feeding, but what you can see there, that wind's just bringing that float back in underneath the pole tip, and it's moving the float, which tells me that that isn't going to be great today. So I'm just going to keep feeding, because we can always start slapping again if we need to, because we've got the same rig on. But that, honestly, that method can be absolutely devastating at times when the fish are, they're sort of coming to the bait, but they don't really want to come in and eat it. Just by plopping that float past can be absolutely brilliant. Right, we gave plopping a go, but the weather and how the wind is today really isn't playing in our favour. So I've just gone back to slapping, and we've caught straight away. Now, for me, what the feeling I get here today now from this practice session is that you're gonna fish short to start off with, decent enough run, then you go long on the bottom, hopefully catch as much as possible, and then at some point in the day, doing this will be very good. Just keep feeding like normal, keep feeding like you are on the bottom, but you're turning a rig over and fishing shallow. And I'm sure at some point you'll have a really good run doing that. Where this might just be a gap filler, because once you go back down on the bottom, you might get another good run, and then it might be time to come in short. So plopping and slapping, that's what I've just done there, and that's been, obviously slapping's been a lot better than plopping, but that's obviously just because of the wind. So I'll see if I can catch one more fish doing that. So that really does prove a point. Changing methods, is changing to the correct method is really, really important. And there we go, the wind actually just died then, and I just plopped it past after having a little spell slapping, and I had a bite immediately. So that really is the great thing about this rig. I can be slapping, and then the wind will drop, plop it past, and you can carry on catching. Now, my mindset now, straight away from this practice session, is that I've got to have this rig set up for the match now, because if you go through a spell where your bottom lines don't kick in and you just need to fill the net with something, I think for me this is a great way of doing it. So I've just plopped that one past and just caught a fish immediately. And they really are weight builders, these fish. Just dropped in, I've caught 4 or 5 of them. It's probably 12 pound. And a middle part of the match, when the carp go a little bit moody, this might be a great way of bumping your bait up. But if you set your rigs up like this, you can have them set up on the winders with your hook length on, all measured to the correct length. It's a really great method to have in your armoury on the day. Right, so shallow rig, very, very simple rig. The great thing about these rigs is that I can actually have them all cut down to the exact length that I want, with the hook lengths on winders in my rig box. So if at any point I do need to rush and go and grab one out because I haven't set one up, or when you're getting ready for the match, you just want to get a rig out, it's all cut to length. So it's an ultra simple rig. I'll start at the bottom though. Again, going for a size 16 MXC4 hook, which is perfect for a 6 or an 8mm pellet. Medium latex band. Again, exactly the same as my bottom rigs. I've gone for a 12-inch hook length, but this time I haven't got a dropper on the hook length. I've just kept that free as shot. Just at the top of the loops of my hook length, I've got 2 number 9 cubes. Now, the most important thing about this rig is the float for me. Now, when you're plopping, slapping or mugging, you need a float that's going to settle ultra quickly. These dibbers do that absolutely perfect, dibber shallows. Now for this type of fishing I'm using a 0.2. The reason for this is that you can put 2 number 9s just below the float, and the weight of the pellet will make that float sit perfect. Now for me that's the perfect size, because you still need some weight on the main line to be able to swing your float to the fish or swing your float past the pole tip, but 2 number 9s is perfect, plus the weight of the pellet, and they will sit at a level where you can easily see the bristle. So that float is the most important thing about this rig. It's also very strong. When you're fishing 12 to 14 inches deep, the float is going to be in your landing net, so you want it to be ultra strong, and these floats really are ultra strong. The main line itself has changed a little bit. I use like 0.23 on my bottom rigs, but for this rig I've actually used 0.20. The reason for that is that when you're plopping, obviously you've got a light float past your pole tip, and if you've got any wind there's going to be a slight bow, so a slightly thinner main line will reduce that a touch, and when you're flicking your rig over you get less drag on the float with a slightly thinner main line. I touched on it before, but the nicest length of line for me is if you put your float by your nose, and at the end of your hand, if you just bite your loop off there, that's absolutely perfect. So that's an ultra simple rig. Have them on your winders ready at home. Super short Dacron connector. Now for this type of fishing, that is the most important thing, because when you're slapping your rig over and you've got that length of line, if you were to just use a reversed bead, the line will always wrap around the end of your pole. Using a super short connector is so important, because you do not want to be going out hooking big fish shallow and the line being wrapped around the end of your pole. Same elastic again, 16 to 18 slick through a long top kit. Again, an ultra balanced rig, really durable. Fishing in this manner, there is a very good chance that you're going to hook an odd big fish. So fishing it with these components really is going to be nice and strong and durable. Like I said before, have them on your winders, all ready to go, ultra simple, and I'm sure you will catch a load of fish fishing like this. Right, so the first 3 methods that I've chose to fish have been absolutely brilliant. So we started short, we had a great run there, caught some stockies and we had an odd decent fish, and then we've gone long on the bottom, and that's been really good as well. That, to be fair, that's been the best method. Long on the bottom's been absolutely fantastic. Then we had a go shallow, which has also been good. I felt like that shallow, it will fill a gap during the match. So there might be a stage in the match where the fish haven't come in yet. Your peg might be a little bit finished on that long line on the bottom, so you can fill a gap when you fish shallow. We've caught a lot of crassios and some stocky carp. And then lastly, we're getting to the later part of the match. We've come into the edge. I have hooked this one, but I've got to be totally honest, it hasn't been great. Which in my eyes is a good thing, because it shows I've done something wrong. I feel like I've got my short, my shallow and long pole on the bottom dead right, but I've definitely done something wrong in this edge. I have hooked this one, and that's good. Cool, look at the size of that. It's absolutely massive, that. But that is the good thing about fishing the edge, you catch fish like that. But it does show that I might have done something wrong down the edge. I don't feel like I've brought enough fish into my peg. Oof, that is absolutely massive. So for tomorrow, what I'm going to try different, I've fed 4s and 6mm pellet down there, but for tomorrow what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to swap that to micros. I'm going to soak some micros up and feed them, and maybe put some corn or worms on the hook. I learned a lot fishing, watching that Submerged video. So maybe like double worm or double corn on the hook, feeding micros could be really good here. It might just bring a few more fish into my peg. But one thing I am going to try now, because I've gone in the edge and it hasn't been great, not enough bites from me anyway, I'll take you through the rig I've used, because I still feel the rig's dead right. But I am going to drop back in on my short line and just see if the fish have moved back into that distance and not into the edge properly yet. which will be another good lesson about how the fish are behaving. But it's good in my eyes. I've gone in down the edge. I've not caught that well. I've caught this great big one, but it's not enough bites, definitely not. I definitely have done something wrong down there today, which gives me scope for tomorrow. So yeah, I'll take you through my rig in a second, because I still feel that's right, and then I'll drop in short to end the day. Right, edge rig. So same again, pellet band, medium latex, but the hook, I've actually stepped it up a size now. When I fish in the edge, there's a very good chance I might put an 8mm copping hook, 8mm copping pellet on the hook, or even an 8mm skretting. So I've gone up a size in hook. I've gone to a size 14. Plus, you can see by the size of that fish I caught, the fish are going to be very big. So I just want to step everything up a touch. I've stepped up the hook length. I've gone up to 0.20 power micron. But this is the only rig I've set up today where I'm not going to use a 12-inch hook length. When I fish in the edge in this depth of water, what I want my bulk very, very close to my hook. Because what can happen, when the fish come into your peg, they can be quite aggressive when they feed, and they can move your rig about, and you can get quite a lot of liners. So having a bulk 6 to 8 inches away from your hook is really important for me. When you get a line bite, you can just lift your float, drop it back in, and it settles immediately. So I've gone for an 0.20 6-inch hook length this time, with all the weight of the float. I think it's 9 number 9 cubes just at the top of the 2 loops. That's really important for me, but everything's just stepped up a touch. Main line again, 0.23. Well, if you're fishing an 0.18 or an 0.20 hook length, you can still use your 0.23, that's absolutely fine. Now, I am absolutely in love with these floats. I used to use quite short floats for fishing in the edge, fishing in shallow water, but since I've started using these are a lot better than what I used to use. It's the Matrix Power Margin floats in 0.5. They take 9 number 9 cubes, which is really important, because you don't want a light float that's just going to get pushed around everywhere. You want a nice heavy float with plenty of weight near the hook. The actual float itself is a fiberglass stem, so it's nice and stable, slim body with a 2.5mm bristle. So when you're fishing with your heavy hook baits, it's not going to get dragged under. And if the light is difficult, you are going to be able to see it. Quite a short line. I've gone for an 8-inch line. I'm quite privileged here because I can actually put my pole tip right next to the platform today. So there's no point in fishing a long line keeping your pole tip away. It's going to be disguised via the platform. Super short Dacron again. And then I've gone for the next size up in slick. I believe that's the 18 to 20, the red stuff. Again, you've got to balance everything. So I've gone for a size 14 hook. So I've stepped up the elastic for the size of fish I'm looking to catch. Again, long top kit and the biggest Matrix Kinder pot. I've been putting about 200mm in every time I feed my edge line before going on it. But then when I go on it, I'm going in on with the large Matrix Kinder pot. So yeah, a real heavy, strong rig, stepped up everything from my short and my long line to go in the edge because the size of the fish are going to be stepped up. So it's nice and balanced again, but that is a really, really effective rig. You're going to get your fish out nice and quick with that size of hook and that strain of elastic. Ultra strong. You're not gonna get broke up on that gear. Get your pole set up right so you can add on sections if you need to, and you're just not going to get broke. And this is an ultra important rig because looking at the size of the fish there, you only need to go on it for half an hour, 40 minutes. You catch 3 or 4 of them and it is massive in your weight. So yeah, set it up like that, you're going to catch loads of big fish. Right, so I've dropped in the edge and it hasn't been great, to be honest, which is fine because I've obviously still got tomorrow and I'm going to change a few things. I'm going to try feeding micros tomorrow and I might change the depth that I fish in. I'm fishing about 2.5 foot up to that pallet and it's very, very shallow in the natural bank here. So I might have a go a little bit tomorrow, getting some micros and fishing just away from the bank a touch, maybe in such a deep water. But I've definitely not done something right, but I'm going to try and put that right tomorrow. The only one thing I want to do now before I end my day is that I want to drop back in on my short line because I feel like the fish have moved close to me but not quite come in the edge. So they might just be still sat on that short pole line. So I have been flicking a few pellets there. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to drop in now, see if I can catch you one quickly, just to end the day, because this might be a better option than fishing in the edge. Dropping back onto this line and not dropping into the edge might be a better option. So I'm going to go straight in throwing like I was earlier. I'm not going to go in and pot anything this time. I'm going to be really positive with my feeding. I'm going to drop in, I'm going to feed twice and just see if I can catch a couple of fish there, because this could be, I've seen it so many times before where the edge isn't right, but that short pole line can be absolutely brilliant. So we'll just see now. So I've dropped in, I've had an indication, but I've got a feeling that might be foul hook that. I hooked it a little way off the bottom. Sometimes they can go down, pick your bait up and come up off the bottom, but I've got a very good feeling that's going to be foul hook, that one. But what it does show me is that there's some fish on that line. Literally that float was probably in there 15-20 seconds and I've had an indication. So if I can try, it might just be a big fish. You still got to play it just in case. But I've got a feeling that's going to be foul hook. But it does show me there's some fish in that area. I fed six meals there when I went back in on it, like I was doing earlier. But there is some absolutely massive fish in Hayfield, so we could have just hooked one of them instead of thinking it's foul hooked. But it is being a bit erratic, this one. Cool, but one thing I will say, hooking fish like this does really put your gear to the test. Those hooks and that line I was mentioning earlier in my rig, that was right on critical then. That was literally, everything was at its max strength and I felt very strong. So that's one way of testing your gear out, hooking a big fish or foul hooking a fish. Just going to take our time with this one, because if it is in the mouth, it's going to be really big. That's the good thing about this 16 to 18 slick though. I feel like if I was to drop in and hook a Crassio, it's more than forgiving enough to get it out and not be, cool, I think it is actually in the mouth that. That is unbelievable if it's in the mouth, how hard that's fought. Yeah, if I could drop in, I could catch a Crassio, I could catch a 2-3 pound stocky and it'd be absolutely fine. And then I could go in, hook a fish like this. It can take me out to that limit, that much pressure on your rig, and it's absolutely fine, this elastic's brilliant. Yeah, I think that's in the mouth, that. So we've been flicking a few pellets there throughout the day whilst I've still been fishing in the edge, and whilst I was fishing long, I've just flicked a few pellets there. And I've come in, fed twice and straight away hooked this. But that really is a testimony to your kit. That was unbelievable how much pressure was on that hook, that line, that elastic at that point. Come on, be kind. There we go. Oh, a nice big one to end the day. So there you go. I spent that much time fishing in the edge and I only hooked that one fish, and the amount of time spent preparing it, working at it, fishing for that one fish isn't in relative to this line. I've literally just dropped in on this line and within 10 or 15 seconds hooked a real decent fish. So that just shows you that at this point in the match, it might not be a fact that I'm doing anything wrong. It might just be a fact that the fish don't want to come up into that shallow water. They might just want to sit at that deeper depth. But that's the last thing I just wanted to try. It's been an absolutely brilliant day. I've covered all my methods that I wanted to cover. So yeah, I'll finish my day short, and then I'll talk you through what I've learned. Well, that has been an absolutely amazing day's practice here at Hayfield Lakes. I've learned absolutely loads. So just to recap, I've started on a short pole. That's been good. I've caught some stockies. I've caught one decent fish. Before I've gone long, I felt like the timing that when I came off that short line straight onto the long pine was absolutely perfect. I've caught really well on the bottom. For me, that's been the best method for the day, long pole on the bottom. I did try shallow, that's been really good as well. I've caught a lot of crassio. I did catch a couple of 4 or 5 pound fish, but a lot of crassio, but they were really big. They were like 2-3 pounders, and I was catching them really quickly. So they're a weight builder and a gap filler for me. If there's any point in the match where I stop catching short on the bottom long, that's one method that I can drop onto. The one thing that I felt like I didn't get quite right today is my edges. I've come in, I've caught one, but there just wasn't the amount of fish that I would be happy with that were coming in the edge. I've caught one, but I've gone back in, I've not had any more bites, I've not had any more signs of fish. So that gives me plenty of scope to work on tomorrow. I'm not lucky enough to have the cameras with me tomorrow, so I'm just going to be working on my own. So I'm going to change a few things that I've done in the edge. I'm going to try micros, I'm going to try fishing in slightly deeper water. So that gives me something to really work on tomorrow. I am going to change a bit of my kit as well. On my short line and my long line fishing on the bottom, I don't feel like it's going to make any difference whatsoever fishing 018 or 020 hook lengths. And I'm still going to fish my 023 main line, which just makes everything a little bit more secure. If I was to hook a big 14, 15 pounder like I did right at the end there, I really want to make sure and give myself a chance of getting it out. And the other thing I'm going to change on my elastic is my elastic when I'm fishing shallow. I'm going to drop down a size on my elastic. I'm going to use the slightly softer one, the 12 to 14, the yellow. Because it was mainly crassio I was catching, I just want to give myself just a little bit of a softer elastic. So I might pull out of a touch left, because they can be quite difficult to get in crassio. They've got very, very bony, hard mouths. So that's the two things I'm going to change with my kit. I'm going to change my hook lengths on my bottom rigs, and I'm going to change my elastic on my shallow rig, and then I'm going to redo my edge line tomorrow. I'm going to try micros, I'm going to try fishing in a different depth. But the best thing what I've done today, I've covered all the 3 things that I spoke about earlier. I've tested my gear out, especially that one at the end. That was unbelievable how hard that fish pulled. I've looked at how the fish are behaving, where are they at what point in the day, and I've messed about with bait as well. So I've just fished pellets today, but then I feel like that wasn't right. I'm going to try micros tomorrow, I'm going to try core, and I'm going to try a few worms. So that's, for me, how you get the best out of a practice day. If you work on all 3 of those elements, and if you can come away like I have today, feeling like you need to change bits and bobs of those 3 elements, that's the best. That's the way to get the best out of a practice day. I hope you guys have enjoyed that, and hopefully if you can repeat that process going into a match that you want to do well on, then hopefully I'll catch you a few more fish and you'll do well in the match that you really want to do well on.